Um, ethics things, which was covered last week's readings. So this will be pretty short. I did not put the slides online. But for ethics, we're going to just quickly highlight the method section. So methods are in your papers. Like when you read them, they're all there, and they all have a very straightforward, like formulaic way to write them. Basically, the method section of your paper explains your study. Who you studied, how you studied them, and all your definitions for your study. Sometimes it will even include like some citations being more specific about why this method is the correct method to study the thing you're studying, but not necessarily. And so in the methods section of a paper, there are 3 subsections to methods. And the first 2 are participants and procedure. Participants is also very formulaic in how we write it. It's always kind of written in the same way. So how many people were in your study? When you're writing this, you probably won't have all of your data collected. So you can just use like the hashtag sign, right? The number sign, and kind of like leave it as blank for now. But you write hashtag participants were recruited. How were they recruited? The SONA Introduction to Psychology Study Pool. You can kind of fluff this up by adding as much detail as you can. So I suggest, for example, how many people signed up for your study? Maybe keep track of that. As well as how many people actually showed up, because you're going to get people who sign up and then don't show up. So how many people signed up? How many people showed? Did you collect any demographic information? Here's where you would report it. Again, we would just use hashtags for now because we don't know what those answers are. If you didn't, that's fine. You just want to have that sentence. Okay. And I think it's important that like in your writing, and it's going to be something that hopefully we're going to have better limitations than this, but our sample sizes are small. Right? And that's not necessarily because you chose a small sample size, but it's because you were limited in your data collection by the institution, by the man, right? The man kept you down. Some kind of like explanation here is nice to acknowledge the fact that in a perfect world, we would have had more participants. If you want to describe your sample, but you didn't collect that demographics, you're like, oh, I wish we could have. I'd be open to you describing the population. And so the population as a whole would be Stonehill. So I've always struggled to find Stonehill's like basic demographics. I don't think they want to advertise how not diverse we are. But you can find information about Stonehill's demographics. Like you could include that here. Your target population are the intro kids, though, right? So that's not necessarily all of Stonehill, but you can acknowledge that as well, right? Like just spend time really thinking about and describing to me who it is that is taking part in your study. And then the second part, which tends to be, for me, the longest and most interesting, is the procedure. What did they do in order? Which, hey, what did you have to explain to me 1,000 times over and continue to every class, right? What happened in the study? Participants were welcomed into a room. They signed a consent form. After signing the consent form, they were given. They then, and you like walk through what that looks like. Your papers that you have read will have a very similar thing. You can look to those for examples. I'm trying to find some examples in my laptop right now of student examples as well. And the last piece is what we call measures and materials. Other people call it other things. Um, but here's where you describe all your operational definitions. So if you're measuring warmth, you could say heading underneath measures would be warmth. So here you can it's very hard to see on the screen right now, but this says, I don't know why they're using numbers. This isn't very psychology of them, but it says 6.13 measures. And then over here, I cut it off, but so clearly at some point they had it says 6.133 self-forgiveness. So each measure, they've had at least two other measures because they went 6.131, 2, and now 3. Each measure gets its own little paragraph. So it says here they use a citation to measure participants' genuine self-forgiveness. Describe what that means, right? So your questions and what towards the last week, I was really just trying to remind us that what we're measuring is not necessarily what we're asking. That is, I don't ask participants, how competent do you think I am, and leave it at that. I say, how smart do you think I am? How intelligent? How ready to handle challenges in front of him is he? And together, questions like that make up competence. So it's that broader category that is the heading, and you just describe what it is. So if you ask less than or equal to 3 questions about the thing, give me all 3 of them. What were they asked? So here, this one, they asked 7. So they just said, I am trying to learn from my wrongdoing. So they gave one example. And each part of the measures and materials is a different thing. It's not every question, it's every thing, which sometimes could be an average, sometimes it could be just one question. And that's the method section. Participants, procedure, measures. Most of this has been written already, so it'll be mostly copy, pasting, formatting nicely, making it sound coherent. As I said, clear instructions with an example will be posted tonight, but that is the general format of a methods section of your paper. So for ethics comes in a bunch of places, and one place it comes in is our participants. Who are we studying? And so I like to point to this example in history as an example of why who we're studying is particularly important. And so the thalidomide, this was a drug in the 50s that was used all throughout Europe to treat a wide range of conditions like colds, flus, nausea, morning sickness, etc. Pneumonia. And in particular, especially in that morning sickness period, doctors in Europe were prescribing this drug a lot because it was reducing symptoms of nausea. Now, the problem, the US did not allow this drug to be used. Right? The FDA stepped in and said, no one gets to take this drug in the United States. And they said, because we looked at who the participants are in the clinical trials that have taken part in this study, and they've never studied pregnant people. Like, they've given this drug to a lot of healthy individuals, and the drug has helped with nausea. But there's been no studies on this drug with pregnant people, and everyone is prescribing it to pregnancy for dealing with morning sickness. We don't like that, rejected. And so no one in the United States gets exposed to this drug. Soon, in a few short years, um, there were my notes aren't that great, but um, there are estimates that over 10,000 fetuses were exposed to this drug while they were in utero, and over half of them died within 3 months of being born. And the others had significant health problems if they were able to survive, right? So by looking at who is being studied, the United States saved, theoretically, thousands of lives by just saying, like, wait, who are you studying, and how does that actually apply to who you want this research to apply to?
Hi, I'm
Come on. I set my sound correctly. I did.
Ben Smith, and this is Crash Course Black American Business. I want you to imagine that you're in the shoes of this person. You're being offered free medical treatment by a team of doctors that work for the U.S. government. In context, there aren't really a lot of doctors that live here. And these doctors from the government seem like people you can trust. Plus, free. So it seems like a really great opportunity to get health care when you might not otherwise have access to. But what if when you went to see this team of doctors, people who you trusted, who were actually, without your knowledge, made to be part of an experiment? And what if, as part of that experiment, you had medication purposely withheld from you, medication that could have saved your life, but because it was kept from you, it led to years-long debilitating illness and even the possibility of death for you, your friends, and your family. I mean, it sounds like a horror movie, but it wasn't. This was very real, and it happened to very real people. Today, we're talking about the Tuskegee syphilis study. Let's start the show. First, a note on terminology. While the study is famously called the Tuskegee syphilis study or experiment, some scholars disagree with that name. The people of Tuskegee, they believe, are not to blame for what happened. And some argue that the framing of it being named the Tuskegee experiment implicitly places the blame and burden on that community, rather than the government. Racism, discrimination, and prejudice have long been part of the way we practice medicine in the United States. This isn't new. In fact, it started in the earliest days of slavery. Enslaved Black Americans were rarely treated humanely by physicians in the antebellum South. Oftentimes, they were only examined when their ability to bear children or to work was in question. And many physicians experimented with new medical treatments on enslaved Black Americans without their consent. Entire fields of study, like the field of gynecology, were built on the backs of Black Americans being exploited and experimented on by the medical system. Many physicians and scientists of this era falsely believed, sometimes consciously and
Sorry. Well, it's not supposed to start there. I think it was supposed to start here.
institute is the place where they would base their project. Many of the subjects were poor and uneducated sharecroppers who lived throughout rural Alabama. Many of them had never seen a doctor, nor had they received any traditional medical care. But in this context, It might have felt to them like they were getting an extraordinary amount. The participants had to have a lot of blood tests, x-rays, and spinal taps, and a lot of tests to see how the disease impacted the population. For participating in the study, the men were offered medical care and burial insurance. And since Black Americans were hit really hard by the Great Depression, these types of incentives were extremely compelling. The Black unemployment rate in the South at that time was around 50%. And many of these men needed benefits for themselves and their families. They were also given rides to and from the study, meals on the day that they were present, free treatment for minor illnesses, ailments. Even though the study was set up like a traditional research study with control groups and experimental groups, the subjects were never actually told that they were part of a study at all. While the men did agree to be examined and treated by the doctors, they weren't told that they were being experimented. Essentially, the researchers never received a really important thing called informed consent. Informed consent is when a researcher tells a research subject about the study they're participating in, risk involved, and gives them the option of whether to participate or not. Informed consent is important because it acknowledges that the participant has the agency to make their own decision for their own body. What the men were told was that they were receiving treatment for something called bad blood, a local term used to describe a number of different illnesses that resembled anemia and fatigue. What's even worse is that even the broader Black community in rural Alabama had been misled about what the public health service was doing. Many of these men were recruited by Black doctors, local pastors, teachers, community leaders, demonstrating that many people thought that the men could benefit from joining. This is an important point because the study members of the Tuskegee community were led to believe that this was a special government program that would be worthwhile for themselves and the whole community. A Black nurse named Eunice Rivers, who's a very
Where is it?
wrote of this infamous study. Hi, I'm Clint Smith, and this is Crash Course Black America. More developed brain remote individual and their children sick affected those of European descent and African descent differently. What's more, many physicians and scientists thought that white Americans had more developed brains than Black Americans. And so even though it was apparent that white Americans could develop syphilis, it was believed that they would suffer more neurological symptoms as the disease progressed. These same physicians and scientists believed that Black Americans had less developed brains and were ruled by more basic organ function. So they posited that Black people would suffer more cardiovascular complications rather than neurological.
All right. So my video used to be chopped up. I don't know why it's not, but that covers the background of Tuskegee. So basically, the government goes into rural Alabama and seeks out Black men who have syphilis. And syphilis is currently raging in the country. They're still kind of like developing. They recently have developed a good vaccine that they think will work, but they haven't really fully understood syphilis yet. And it tends to be the case that people come to the doctors when it gets too late. So government says we need to study the progression of syphilis. So what they do is they go to these Black communities and they seek out men who have syphilis. And they say, we want you to come in, we're gonna give you some free healthcare. And they basically have the treatment for syphilis right in front of them, and they don't give it to them. Instead, they don't treat the syphilis, and they watch how the disease progresses in these men over time. And so they're withholding medical care, even though they are pretending that they are giving medical care, so that they can better understand syphilis. Important is that the government has actively chosen a specific subgroup to study, right? Black Americans, poor Black Americans. This is a risk because they need the money. They don't have access to health care. right? Some of them haven't ever seen a doctor. And so who is more likely to go to study to get some healthcare? Someone who has never had it. In the same way, in intro, there's a big ethical question that we try to deal with that says these students need the grade. They are more likely to come, you sign up for your study, than some random Stonehill student who's not in intro because they want a grade. And so how do we ensure, everyone remembers from intro, that you're not forced to participate? That there is an alternative option. Does anyone remember what they have to do as the alternative? Right. So you can like read a study or read something and then write a paper about it instead. Right. This is our way to try to say we're not forcing the intro kids to be a part of your study. They have an alternative option. I don't know if that's really worth it in the end. And we go back and forth on that. But yes, I would say as well, as we're thinking about like the students who are going to be coming to your studies, as you're giving them the consent form, try to be a person. And by that, I mean like remind them who you are. Like, hi, I'm Lauren. I'm in, research methods in psych. We have to do this as part of our class. The psych faculty, we've been trying to game plan and talk about this for a while. Intro kids are seemingly more and more often giving shitty data, right? They're coming into the study, circling 7 the whole way down, and then leaving, getting the credit and go, right? And that sucks for you, and it sucks for like my research, because I can't do my studies if people are just coming in and doing 7s all the way through, right? It hurts me, it hurts my career, and it hurts you and your projects. And we have a hypothesis that maybe if like the students are more like, this is something that you have to go through, right? Like kind of just like make a connection with them a little bit more and remind them why they're here. It's not just for intro, it's for your project in class. Maybe they'll take it a little more seriously. We keep talking about doing an experiment between the different classes to figure out the best way to get good data. We haven't figured out a good way to test that yet, but just something to keep in mind, right? That these are students who probably would be like to do other things, but they have to do this thing. Even though they don't, they can write a paper. And so try to keep that in mind and be friendly to them as much as you can. So once this is like brought to light that the government has been experimenting on Black African American men and not providing them the treatment, it becomes a whole brouhaha, and Congress kind of meets and says, like, this is a problem. We need to develop ethical standards for the government in order to know how to engage in research more ethically. And the commission created by the government, which is kind of funny in the sense that the government has done something terrible, and they're like, we'll form a group that will tell us how we could have done better. Like, you knew though. What is this? But they bring in, experts from across the country to kind of weigh in on how we can apply ethics to all disciplines. So they were trying to apply this to science as well as psychology, to biology and education. And they came up with these 3 tenets: respect for persons, justice, and my mind's just not feeling words today. Beneficence. Oh, geez. See, I knew I couldn't do it. Respect for persons is this idea of giving informed consent, right? That's why the first thing you have to give them is informed consent. They need to be able to opt out of the study. That also means we can't coerce people, right? Like they literally have to be able to opt out. Yes, they could say, well, the Black men didn't have to come to the study. Yes, but you targeted a population that would have to go because otherwise they're not going to get any medical treatment. Like you're really incentivizing them too much to take part in the study. If I wanted to pay students, each student gets a $50 gift card to participate to Dunkin' into my studies. The IRB would say, no way, you can't do that because no one could possibly turn that down. Right? That's unethical. You're paying too much. And it also means we have to identify who is vulnerable and put up extra safeguards around studying those individuals. What's an example of some vulnerable group? Children, great. Children, right? That's why we have to be over the age of 18 to take part in any study, because we don't want to study kids. It creates all these loopholes. You have to get the parents' permission. I have dreams of doing a study with adolescents, but I just don't want to deal with the headache. Honestly, that's the one thing I'm just like, no, I don't have time for that. But if anyone else wants to have time for that, I got ideas. Good. So children. Other examples? Homeless population, another great example, right? Individuals who are unhoused, they're more likely to kind of seek out research because they're going to be lower income individuals generally who are going to be more likely to kind of tap in and be like, yes, I'll do anything for a couple dollars. And generally, we think about individuals who are incarcerated, so jailed, like prisoners, they tend to be identified as vulnerable, as well as any individual with disabilities. The second one is just thinking about the fact that we really shouldn't do research if the harm is greater than the benefit. So is there a benefit of understanding syphilis? Yes. Right. It is important for us as a community, for science to develop better methods. Like that is a big benefit. But at what cost? What are the potential harms? So for our research, psych research doesn't really have much benefit to the world. I know my research has no benefit at all, but it also has very little harm to the world. And I'm not harming my participants in any way. Their hands might get a little tired, they might get a little bored. But beyond that, we also have very little harm. So our studies tend to be okay, but still make sure that that 20 minutes is worth it, right? Like there's still harm being done that you're taking that student away from time they could be studying in an ideal world. So what benefits can we receive out of that 20 minutes? Well, we can collect as much data as we want. And justice thinks about this idea that like the intersection almost. So it wasn't just that there's a risk of not giving someone treatment to a drug. That's not how drug tests work nowadays. If you're developing a new syphilis treatment, the control condition gets the current best syphilis treatment. They don't get no syphilis treatment. Right? You always have to compare against what is the current best practice. And so here, justice is thinking like, who is taking on the burden of participating in research? In the Tuskegee syphilis study is pretty clear. Black men are being asked to take on all of the burden, even though everyone gets to benefit. White men will receive better health care based on the knowledge that we gain without having any of the risks. That is not good. Or who are we selecting? That if I am trying to study something that I think will impact society, then I should be selecting all of society, right? And not leaving out, even if by mistake, certain groups like pregnant women. Again, I think I've mentioned this before, unless you're left-handed, then all bets are off. We don't care about you. For neuroscience, left-handed people are just not allowed to take part in neuroscience studies. Right. So Tuskegee kind of hit all three, right? That the participants were not treated respectfully, they were lied to and not told at any point, right? The debriefing part is kind of the forgiveness piece, that if we're going to lie to people, that my consent form doesn't tell you everything, then I need to tell you what actually occurred as soon as you're done. You need to like, hey, listen, I actually kind of misled you a little bit. This is what happened. And in a Tuskegee syphilis study, the families were not informed that they were part of a study. They were not given a chance to consent, and they weren't told what was going on. They weren't ever debriefed. They were obviously extremely harmed in this study as well. And they were targeted for specific purposes because they can't opt out and they definitely would be more likely. And there was definitely, as the video kind of hinted, and I skipped around that part, a lot of racial bias and not misinformation, what's the word I want? Pseudoscience that led them to think it was important to study the Black population, and it just wasn't true. The American Psychological Association, well, we're bound to, takes the first three pretty much straight from the Belmont report, but they add on to other kind of ethics. And now they have done this because when APA, the American Psychological Association, is thinking about ethics, we're also thinking about clinicians, which is hilarious. Like such a what a wonderful link. Does anyone watch? Oh God, no one wants this. I think that's the name of the show. We just started to watch season two. And in season two, there's this character, and she is dating her therapist. Right. And that is against one of these five APA general principles. And it's funny because everyone in the show knows that this is against like the general principles. They're like, that's very unethical. You shouldn't be doing that. How do we know that's unethical? Well, one, it just sounds it, but the APA has written down, you can't do this. Um, so the first one is this idea of the harm pros and cons. What you want to make sure that everything that you're doing as a clinician, as a researcher, is doing good and avoiding harm. This generally relies on our institutional review board to come in and tell us as a third party, is what we are doing ethical? Are we getting more good than harm? And they can get pretty specific. I'm actually very always impressed with Stonehill's institutional review board because they care about all the things. I'm like, really? Want me to tell you about that too? They want to know, where am I handling the data? Where does that data get stored? How am I ensuring that it's protected? Did I inform participants that eventually their data is going to be uploaded to the internet for everyone to see? They're really good about making sure that what I am doing is ethical. I really like that about them. Here, the second one, justice, same thing again, right? We're thinking about how do we ensure that the benefits and burdens of research are spread fairly across our populations. They had a little bit of a conversation with me about this because I was like, well, I'm going to recruit some SONA students and they get the benefit of SONA credit. And ideally, I want to sample some business students and they get the benefit of entering a raffle for Dunkin' cards. I'm like, is that equal? Like, is that fair? Like, can the SONA students sign up for the Dunkin' cards and not get the credit? And I was like, no. Uh, but they wanted me to think about that, right? Make sure, is this fair? How am I being biased about why I want to sample business students? And how might that impact questions I ask? The third one is the element for the first one, right? So that informed consent piece, recognizing informed consent, making sure that there is confidentiality include and that we care for vulnerable population, right? So first three, Belmont report, just move the order around. The fourth one, integrity, is that we really shouldn't lie, right? That we should aim in all of our practices, again, both as clinicians, but also as researchers, to be accurate, to be honest, and to be truthful. And if we are not truthful, right, if we're deceiving our participants, the first thing we should ask is, really? Do you have to lie? Like, is it critical for your study to succeed to lie? And beyond that, now we've tried to add into this that integrity also means that you're open about your research findings, regardless of the outcome. So one of the papers I have to write is I have to basically just like rerun someone's analysis. They have 5 studies, and I was given the job to redo them all, make sure that they didn't lie, or like everything works exactly to the point of there's a confidence interval that's off by 1/100th, and I'm calling it out, being like, that's incorrect. There's a negative sign somewhere that shouldn't be there. Incorrect. Up until the point where they say we randomly gave people 30 tweets to review out of 200 tweets. And so I was like, oh, that's pretty random. But actually, there's 5 sets of tweets of 30 that they could have been given. That's not random. I mean, it's kind of random, but it's not random. Like you were only given 5 chances to see a tweet or not 200 chances, right? So being more transparent and accurate in our research. So if we get null effects, right? If we don't find significance, still talking about why that research matters. And then the last one is our fidelity and responsibility. That is where in No One Asked for This, they're focusing on for this character's arc. That there is a role of trust between you as a therapist and your client, with you as a researcher and the participant, to maintain that confidentiality, to not breach any ethical standards, right, at all times. My therapist has, many times said, like, or every time I get a new therapist, they're always like, so if I see you at the grocery store, I'm not going to acknowledge that I know you, right? And it's not because I hate you, but it's because that's the ethical thing to do. Because as soon as a therapist is like, hey, how's it going? Then everyone around, if they know what their job is, they now know that you know them. And that could be a risk because now you've exposed that this person goes to therapy. And maybe we don't appreciate that. And so it is acting that I will keep your secrets. There is this issue of trust, but also that there's conflicts of interest, right? That I can't date my clients because they've disclosed so much of me in this personal space. Like, it's just too easy for me to use that information against them, right? Like it just becomes this very weird power differential of a relationship. So here, this was last year, or no, wait, this summer. Yes. Uh, the IRB sent back information. They said the content of the second and third study may be psychologically difficult for undergraduate participants. Provide further information about how participant protection will be ensured. They were worried about what? What is Stonehill's IRB worried about? Respect for person, how so?
It can be harm to the students as they were doing it. Maybe it would be too difficult and it would cause them stress and all the other things. So it's necessary.
Great. So one thing is that like, are they fully aware that in the study that they're going to be conducting, they might be exposed to something particularly traumatic? So that's one, right? Like this idea that if they're going to take part in my study, they need to be fully informed that what they're going to experience could be traumatic, upsetting, stressful, traumatic to watch, really. That's what that one was. As well as there is also this concern that they're having that if it's traumatic, it might also be harmful, right? And so they're kind of doing two at once. Like, how are you protecting them against harm? And the way to protect them against harm in this case is to make sure it's really clear what's happening, right? Give that informed consent. So in that study, there's really no deception. Like, hey, if you're going to take part in the study, it's in the big red letters. You're going to see some shit. And then before you see that shit, it's like, are you sure you want to continue? It's going to be graphic. You can opt out right now. If not, turn on your sound, please. Let's go. So that is this idea of ensuring that the harm that I am going to be causing these participants are as many times as I can warned, right? Like that I'm protecting that anyone who's like, I don't want to hear gunshots, then they are given multiple opportunities to get out. Even though they can leave no matter what, I want to protect them and inform them, you're going to hear some gunshots. Do you want to not experience that? If so, please leave. So we have this example as well from 6 years ago, where Google was trying to test its new AI, which at this point, LOL. But they were trying to develop some facial recognition. And this tends to be a pretty big problem because generally, when facial recognition first came onto the scene, and still to this day, uh, the people that created facial recognition are software developers, are brilliant minds out in Silicon Valley. They tend to be pretty much white men, right? And so when they're writing code for how to detect a face, the best code they can write is how to detect their own face, right? That's what they're practicing on. And so the facial recognition software that was first coming out was really good at detecting white faces if it was a US-based facial recognition. Um, Interestingly, maybe not surprisingly, Chinese facial recognition software really good at detecting Chinese faces, not good at detecting white faces. Right? Like it was working like it was just a cultural problem, right? That the sample was primarily of the coders. And so what was happening is that minority faces were getting misidentified at much higher rates than white faces. There was one time where someone put, like the police were using it to scan for criminals, and someone gave them the faces of members of Congress, and only the black congressional leaders were getting flagged as criminals. It wasn't good. So Google's like, we have this problem. We don't have enough photos of black faces to train our models. And everyone wants to have their facial recognition, right? You want to be able to look at your phone and it unlocks. And so they went to Atlanta and other US cities and looked for homeless people. And what they did is they said, hey, here's a phone. Can you just play with it for a few minutes? If you do, we'll give you a $5 Starbucks gift card. And unbeknownst to the people who were playing with the phone the phone is recording it. The camera is on, recording the face of the person looking at this phone. Other times, they were told it was scanning their face, but it was kind of like a selfie game. Just play the game a little bit and scan your face for the game. This was potentially upsetting to many people. Why might this be an ethical concern? We do want phones to open, right? Like there's good that can come out of Google having this data collection. It makes sense. There's a clear problem. Facial recognition is not doing good on black faces, so let's collect more facial images of black faces. Why is this an ethical issue? Christian, you had mentioned why this might be unethical. You mentioned why this might be unethical. This example, you gave an example of a vulnerable population.
That they don't know purpose of what's going on, and they can't consent for their face going to be scanned or taken use of. Yeah, consent.
Perfect. So one thing, they're not really consenting in the same way as we would expect, right? They're not being informed. Sometimes they're being lied to. But there's also this vulnerable population problem as well. And so why is this a vulnerable population? Besides the fact we said it's a vulnerable population. Why are they more likely to say yes than if a stranger approached you on the street? Great, they need the gift cards in order to eat, right? Like they are taking part in the study for survival in a sense, right? They're not because they want to, but because they need to. And at the point where you're doing a study because they need to do it, starts to get ethically questionable, right? Which is why they have that persona, they have an alternative option, right? Students do not need to take part in your study. We claim, and we do get students that in intro will turn in essays instead. Less than you would expect. Some people just don't do anything. I'm just like, why? The same reason, why do people not do the bonus points? I just don't understand. Sorry. Great. So we have both this like lack of informed consent, but also the fact that there's a vulnerable population. Okay. Last but not least, what I want to go over is I put on the week's 10 module a link to a Google Sheet that has pretty much nothing on it. There's display. Displays. Arrange. Okay. So I grabbed one of Caroline's studies, examples. Did I give it back to you already?
No.
All right, it's in my office. Oh, no, I mean, I don't need it. It's okay. But this is what a blank data set looks like. Your goal is to fill it to 26. Now, each group has a different data set. So yeah, I'll take one at random. It's okay.
No. It's close.
Um,
Oh, one more.
very effective.
It's like 12,000 pages.
And so first thing you want to write down is the number. Who is the participant, right? Some kind of ID that you have to connect the participant that you're looking at. And so once you get their paper, if it's paper-based, you write a number, 1, and then start coding it. It's nice to have some kind of information about when they were collected. So just the date. You don't have to go as specific as the time, but a day would be helpful. And who ran it? Could be helpful maybe if everyone is there, then who inputted it, something to kind of know who's inputting the information. The next thing that shows up are any conditions. Which, do they have where's their writing conditions? Do they have the writing about someone that they like or hate?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
They
So,
will.
sure. So first thing that happens in Caroline and Molly's study is they write for
2 minutes.
2 minutes about a time, remembering a professor that they loved or professor that they hated. So maybe I would put in here, this is participant number 1. They were run today. The researcher was Kevin. So they wrote about a participant that they hated. Then in Caroline's study and Molly's, they have a specific, they counterbalance. So I went through and I looked at this sample and I saw that her rate my professor comes first. So I put an R and then Yik Yak came second. So I put a Y. So the order here is RY. Then they have a condition of whether or not the rate my professor profile is either like positive or negative. So maybe I would write positive. Rate my professor, high or low, I would call that positive, negative. You can see how my variables, the variable names up here, the first row is the name of the variable. Anything below is the participant. Each participant is on their own line, so we're going to be going across. It's rate my professor, so it tells me something about the variable, and then I try to include the different levels. Right? So not just condition, rate my professor, but rate my professor what? Positive or negative. So I also know as I'm inputting it, it's either going to be a P or an N. Now, at this point, Caroline has scale. So you read about that, and then you answer some scale questions, like so. First question is, Dr. Smith is competent in teaching. So this column is called competent in teaching for rate my professor, because for their study, they want to know the competence in teaching for rate my professor ratings and Yik Yak ratings. So this column will be competence in teaching, rate my professor. Now, what Caroline and Molly will have to keep in mind is that there are other times that Yik Yak comes first. You can't just go straight across when you're inputting. Instead, if Yik Yak comes first, you might have to first go all the way to the competence in teaching Yik Yak column and input the answer here. And then go across. What I do and what you should do is sort this in order. So here, competence in teaching, that's the first question. Then it's knowledgeable in their subject area. So knowledgeable. Then it's can explain difficult ideas, explain diff. Then communicates clearly, commune. Engaging. And everything stays the same. Whatever the name is for this set of questions is going to be the name for the other set of questions. The only thing that changes for Molly and Caroline would be what condition. This could be pre-post. Could be a lot of things. Now, potentially, I hope Molly and Caroline know their study better than I do. And it could be that the first 3 questions are about competency and the next 3 questions are about warmth. So then they could name their variables more directly towards that. So maybe this is competency first question, Yik Yak. Competency second question, Yik Yak. But then over here is warmth first question, Yik Yak. Because this is, I feel comfortable crying in their office. I feel comfortable expressing myself, so let's be warmth. That the variable can tell me which method in that method section, where it lines up. Right, and they're descriptive. You look at this and you have a good idea of what this variable is looking at. If you're doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it definitely means you have to follow the order that you gave it to them. If you randomize the order, then I would be a little more descriptive than just 1. So you go across and you put that in. Now, for pretty much everyone, we all have scales. I don't want you to type anything but the number, right? Even if it's like strongly disagree. One, it's going to take you way too long to type that. Two, the number for a reason. We're trying to analyze the numbers. So just know that when you're putting in these answers, you're putting in just the number. So even though it says neither disagree nor agree, if that was circled, it would just be a 4 for their scale. And so we go through that scale, and those are all the questions that I think you collected. I set this up like a minute before class. So then I would be done. And I would make sure that somewhere on this packet, right, I can line up my person ID with this. So if my group member was like, how do they answer a 27 on a scale of 1 to 7? Then we can go back to the data set and see exactly where they got it wrong. Right? But each person has to be entered into an Excel sheet. This can be Microsoft Office, Excel. It could be a Google Doc, like a Google Sheet like this. But we all, as a group, need to create one and then input as we collect. It makes sense the best you can to kind of input as you get them or like soon after, just because you don't want to be doing it at the last minute. But take your time, because the last thing we would want is a typo. Does that make sense for the data set? Right. Anything that they answer needs to be written down in this document. So it needs to be written down for each person in the same way. So set it up in a way that would make sense to you and your group. I have a whole paragraph about how the research team has a column that says this. Comp teaching rate, my professor _C. No context. They don't ever touch it. I can't like recalculate it to get it to work as a number, but it's a different number. I'm just like, what is this? Don't know. But that's because they did a bad job explaining their data, right? If their labels made more sense, I could look at that and immediately know, oh, I see what they did. That. So if whatever it is has to make sense to you and your study. So here, as I mentioned, right, for Caroline and Molly, the variables all have YY or RMP because we're trying to input for which set of questions they're answering. And then again, high, low, maybe better is pos neg, where I can say negative. Searcher, maybe there would be one for inputter. All right. So what we have